Hi, this video is about simulation theory. A lot of people come to this channel because they like INTJs for one reason or another, and they like to hear us talk about things in detail. However, a lot of times INTJs don't ever like to express their ideas until they're really fully formed. But the downside of that is we never talk about things because we're always working on it. So I thought I'd put a video together about simulation theory. I'm not a big fan of it. I kind of hate it. I think a lot of us smart people kind of steer clear of it, and they don't even touch the subject. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, the physicist, he said it's a 50-50 shot, and it's proposed by Tesla, the guy who does Tesla, Elon Musk, always forget his name. But he favors the theory a lot, and I'm not a big fan of it, and I'll go into it in this video. And because of that, this is at least a 2-drink minimum video, because you don't understand why I'm upset about it, but once I go into detail, maybe you'll see where I'm coming from. Again, that's strong. This video is brought to you by whiskey, because it's a whiskey kind of video. It's coming in vogue lately because of technology, but first let's cover what simulation theory is. Well, first off, hope you guys are doing well, taking care of yourselves. But what is simulation theory? Simulation theory is that everything in the world that we exist in an artificial computer simulation for one reason or another. And it's interesting theory in a sense that I can see where it's coming from, because people think it's coming from video games and such. That's not it. I think it's coming more from computer programs that try to figure things out. So early on, video games could figure out checkers, and then they moved on to chess, but they had a lot of problems with the games that had a lot of variables in them, like poker, which has a huge amount of variables in it because of human behavior, which is illogical, and of course luck, probability. The problem is that anytime you have lots of luck, it makes it hard to predict. They say with a game of poker, because it's so hard to figure out for computers, it's more options and variabilities than grains of sand in the ocean or stars in the sky. Chess is actually pretty straightforward. They call it deterministic gameplay. Well, poker, on the other hand, is very much about luck. And to understand that, artificial intelligence has conquered poker and other games like Monopoly. And how they do it is kind of counterproductive to what we do as humans. So with games like Monopoly, for example, what they do is they determine set outcomes that are considered successful, like winning the game and having lots of money and properties. And they just let the computer run through lots and lots of iterations, and it tries things that humans never would try. Some things are just plain dumb, like buying everything and then selling it instantly, or not buying anything and giving away your money. It tries everything, and with the real power, what people are missing, they always focus on the simulation, getting all the factors in and details. It's really about accelerating time. So it's just like me or you are playing Monopoly. It would take us an hour to play a game. We can only play maybe 3 or 4 games per week for most people. But since the computer accelerates time, it's so fast, it can go through thousands of games an hour, and they run the game of Monopoly for 2 weeks, and that's millions and millions of games that it runs. And what it does, it comes to the understanding that it doesn't always give you a perfect solution. It gives you how to break even. A lot of times with the games of chance, like flipping a coin, for example, it's more about breaking even. Most times if you ask a human to predict a coin toss, they will get it wrong most times. Well, not most times. He won't be 50-50. Usually it's less than that. And that's why I'm fascinated with gambling, because it preys on these human fallacies, these problems we have. So like your best strategy for picking a coin toss accurately is always picking heads or always picking tails, because you're guaranteed to get 50-50. You just got to play long enough. So a lot of these games, when artificial intelligence looks at games like poker or Monopoly, it can't give you a perfect strategy. It gives you a strategy that makes you break even. And that makes a thing with poker is it takes an average player and brings him up to more of a top tier level if he plays by the strategy. It makes more top tier players, but excuse me, it makes more top tier players, but doesn't make for a perfect strategy. But that's where they're coming from with the simulation theory, is they're thinking that perhaps this is a historical simulation. They're trying to understand what their ancestors were like by running simulations of us. Hold on. I wonder if it's the drink. But it's either a simulation of our history, but I don't think there's much point in that, because you would need to know every single factor for it to make sense, or else you don't know the factors. It's not a one-for-one copy of what you are. And if you know all the factors, you don't need to run the simulation. It would make sense, I think, if, for example, you're going to propose a mission to the Alpha Centauri, really the most closest star, you want to colonize it. It's really resource intensive. It could be done, but it's a lot of commitment, multiple generations. Is it worth the effort? And you can run a simulation to see good optimal strategies, just like with Monopoly. You can increase your odds, because like I said, humans are dumb and they will not always break even at the best scenario. So it kind of hedges your bets. So I appreciate the theory at face value. I can see where they're coming from. But the main thing that makes simulation work is you have to have all the factors to factor it in. Just like with Monopoly. Monopoly is pretty simple. It's easy to program the factors, but life is very complicated. But it's not ununderstandable. I can see why we would have a simulation. But the question about what if we were in a simulation, I don't really like it, but I'll get into that. So suppose it is true. Suppose that we are in a simulation. Then there'll be two kinds of simulations. An imperfect one and a perfect one. An imperfect simulation, we would find out it's a simulation one way or the other. There'll be things like things would make sense. And I don't mean in the way that we don't understand things in the world. So we figure things out, we think we got figured out, and something new happens, and we've got to reevaluate the theory. Just like with Isaac Newton and his theories of gravity and motion. We thought we had things figured out, but there's one variation. They observed the planet Venus. It had weird motions that didn't make sense with the Newtonian physics. So then Einstein came along, and he proposed the theory of how gravity is affecting light and shifting the position of Venus. So he observed it, came up with a theory to explain it, and had a predicted outcome. You say, if you go to this place and observe it right at the right time, you'll see this wobble as I'll predict. And it made the universe make more sense. So it's not like the imperfect simulation, we find things that don't make sense. We find things that don't make sense all the time. I think maybe millions of years in the future, when we got everything pretty much figured out, there'll be something, we think we got gravity understood, and all of a sudden it would change. It's like the rules are being changed midstream, kind of like in the Matrix, where the Matrix gets changed, and you see the cat walk across twice. Everything's like that, and it would be inconsistent. And interestingly enough, that's where the word cosmos comes from. It's the antonym for chaos. Cosmos in ancient Greek was an orderly universe that we can make sense of. The antonym would be chaos, which makes no sense. So far as we know the universe, it makes sense. But there's a lot we don't understand. But that would be an imperfect simulation. We could prove it one way or another. It would be illogical inconsistencies. Another side note, thing like dark matter and dark energy, we noticed the spins of the galaxy was not making sense according to what we can observe. So there must be extra mass in there to explain it. So we came up with the idea of must be dark matter. Oddly enough, they were saying that 80 to 90% of the universe is dark matter or dark energy. That's a large chunk of the universe we cannot directly observe. So we have a lot to go before you could prove an imperfect simulation. But it will be more interesting, I think, if it's a perfect simulation. Now, if it's a perfect simulation, we have no way of knowing. I'll step back before I go on further. But another implication I think is interesting about an imperfect simulation is if it's imperfect, we prove it that's perfect, it invalidates the simulation. And at that point, the people who run it might say, oh, the simulation is no good, reset, and our existence will come to a stop. So it may not be in our best interest to prove that it's wrong. Well, that's beside the point. There's more to it, and I'll come back to that. But going back to the perfect simulation, if it's a perfect simulation, we have no way of proving it. And that's what would happen is they'd have multiple iterations of imperfect simulations until they make the simulation so good that the people in the simulation cannot find out it's imperfect. Then it becomes a perfect simulation. We have no way of proving it. And we'd be guessing. It would be a supposition. But I think it neglects there's certain flaws in the theory that don't make sense. Well, let me go more in detail. So the difference, I think, that, like I said earlier, the most important element of simulation theory, the power of it, just like with a Monopoly game or the poker game, is the time differential. It's not the factors. It's not all the factors go with all the ingredients. It's not that. It's multiple iterations, millions upon millions. So there's a time differential. The real simulation makers have a slower time rate than what we would have. We would go thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands times faster than they would. We would evolve much faster than they would. There's a few sci-fi stories that deal with this topic, and there's a Star Trek Voyager episode where they deal with it, and it's based on a Nebula award-winning novel, actually. See if I can find it and put it in the comments or something. But there's a sci-fi novel where they talk about that. They have a spaceship that goes to an orbiting star, and this neutron star has super dense gravity, so time flows differently. So time is flowing faster on there. And in the example of Voyager or Star Trek, the ship comes up, they're locked in time. Meanwhile, the primitive planet, they're like Stone Age technology, and they're observing them, but they're evolving super quickly. And so 1 or 2 days will go by them getting stuck, and that's like millions of years on that slower planet, that faster evolving planet. And so before you know it, the planet has greater technology than the spaceship in orbit. That's the problem with simulation theory, in the sense that if we figure out we're in a simulation, we can give them false information, and we would figure it out before they would. So we would be smarter than them. And so, example, if it was Alpha Centauri mission, they're trying to see if it's worth the resources because it's resource intensive. We'd figure out what they're up to. We pieced it together, and what we could do is we can, for our self-preserving interest, we can either give them false information that we need more time to figure it out, or we could say, yeah, the trick to surviving that trip is that they have a supercomputer and they have to copy the information on Earth to Alpha Centauri. And that would be us duplicating our simulation. We would increase our survival. I kind of borrowed that idea from a sci-fi novel called Man Plus. That was the spoilers if you haven't read that book from 1970. But yeah, so I mean, there's ways we can manipulate it. And we also give them false data and say there's this new technology that it will solve all your problems, when actually it's a nuclear bomb and it blows them up because we're smarter than they are. So that's the problem. I think why it wouldn't make sense, why a smart civilization wouldn't rely on their simulation for everything. It would give them little things, but not big things. Also, I think it doesn't make sense why free will would need to be determined or simulated, or self-consciousness. And for all I know, I mean, maybe this is all a dream and I'm the only one that's self-consciously aware and there's no one else in the world. But the simulation has no need for me to be self-conscious. But I think we would all agree that we're all self-conscious and self-aware in our society. That many people being self-aware, I don't see a purpose that they would just need the factors and to contribute to the simulation. I don't think free will would really need to be part of the factors, all that many free wills floating around. But my main problem is there's two types: imperfect simulation and perfect simulation. Now, the imperfect simulation we can manipulate, we can figure it out, we can prove it. But like I said, I don't think an imperfect simulation is likely. I think more like would be the perfect simulation would eventually evolve. The imperfect one, lots of iterations, they learn how to make a perfect one, and we would be in the perfect one. The problem with the perfect simulation is you can't prove it. And I have a big problem with anything that's you can't prove wrong. And that goes into scientific theory. So scientific theory, you observe a phenomena, you come up with theory. A lot of people mess this third step up, is you try to prove it false. Failing to prove it false, you accept it as a theory. A lot of people think you come up with theory and then it's true and you accept it. But no, you legitimately try to prove it false with multiple ways. And so the earlier example with Einstein, with the planet Venus, he said, go to this position and observe Venus's position. If I'm wrong, the positions will be wrong. That's what it was about. It was about proving him right. It was about trying to prove him wrong. It failed to prove him wrong. There's lots of experiments that try to prove his theories wrong. They fail to, so that it, in fact, failing to prove it false makes it true. With simulation theory, the perfect simulation is unfalsifiable. You can't prove it wrong. So what's the point? In many ways, that's how religion works. In ancient times, religion they have a lot of theories about how you run things, how you live your life. And religions would tell you, do this and your crops would grow, do that, you will live longer. But as science kind of replaced those ways of thinking, religion has retreated into more metaphysics about what happens when we die. Is there a God? Why are we here? Which I think are wonderful questions that deserve to have answers. I think religions are much better equipped to answer these questions than science. But my objection is when the waters get muddied. So simulation theory is more like a religion because you can't prove it wrong. And it's even worse than religion in a sense, because religion, you don't really know God's plan. He tells you what you should and should not do, but you never know what God's plan is. However, with simulation theory, you do have an idea of what God's plan is, or the makers of the simulation. The simulation is they're trying to get information from us. That's way more power over the programmers than we have over God. And we're clueless with God. So in many ways, it takes God and brings him down lower, which is very fitting for the modern age. But again, it's not really science. It's more religion than science. That's more of a pseudoscience. And you see that more with pseudosciences. They'll appropriate scientific sounding words into their views. Like Scientology, I don't want to get censored, but Scientology, for example, they use science in their title, and they'll come up with these meters that measure your thetans. That's your galvanic skin response. And the thing with simulation theory, it's simulation in theory. Simulation is a very modern, tech-friendly word. Theory is very science. But it's not science. There's nothing science about it because you can't you can't make it false. It's unfalsifiable. So and by very definition, it's not scientific. It's more like a religion. And that's why I have a really big problem with, I don't really mind religion. I don't mind science. I really get upset when they combine the two and they're not upfront about it. And simulation theory really isn't a new idea. It's the idea that there's more to the world, or that, like I said, am I really who I am, or am I a character in someone's dream? It's a very old idea, and it's nothing new. But the main thing is that you just can't falsify it. I guess I'm repeating myself. But yeah, look at my notes. I think I covered everything. But yeah, that's all I got. Kind of a short video this time, only 18 minutes. Well, thanks for watching.